Hey guys, this is Cole, and today I want to see if I can use this Whetstone Knife Sharpener Kit by Absolute Peak Products to sharpen these two very dull knives that I picked up from a thrift store for $1 each. Let's go ahead and give it a shot. Now, getting into the box, we open it and we see that it's packaged very nicely. Whetstone actually comes in this nice foam padding to make sure that it's not damaged in shipping. Comes with your microfiber polishing cloth. Here is a knife sharpening angle guide to help you feel the right angle as you're sharpening. And again, removing the whetstone from the foam here. You can see that this is the actual stone that we'll be using to sharpen. It's got the Absolute Peak logo on the front and the 6,000 white grit on the top and the 1,000 blue grit on the bottom. The final thing that comes in your knife sharpening kit is this bamboo base, really nice bamboo base with a non-slip silicone base. First thing I'm gonna do to get started is to soak this whetstone for about 10 minutes. That allows the water to penetrate into the stone and aids in sharpening. So I just have a small dish of water here and I'm gonna put the whetstone in. Notice all the bubbles that escape as the stone goes into the water. While the whetstone continues to soak, I want to show you that these are legit dull knives. Again, these are knives that I just picked up for $1 at the thrift store. So there's a lot of debate on the internet about what the best test is to see if your knife is really sharp. But one thing that a lot of people say is cutting through paper is not a good test to tell if it's really sharp. But if your knife can't even cut through paper, then you know that it's a dull knife. So let's just test that out and see. So again, first of all, you notice it doesn't really catch or cut into the paper. It'll start to cut after a second, but it doesn't really grab the paper and cut in like it should. Let's do this other knife. Again, just has this one especially, oh, kind of got an edge there, but it's more just tearing, and you can tell that it doesn't immediately start to cut, which is a bad sign. It's definitely a dull knife. And just so there's no question about whether these knives are really dull, I'm gonna take them and do this on a whetstone. Kind of really makes me sick. And if you don't like the sound of nails on chalkboard, maybe mute this part of it. But I just want to make sure that what I'm showing you is a really dull knife. All right, that should do the trick. Before we get started sharpening today, I just want to draw out what we are trying to do when we sharpen a knife using a whetstone. The two most important words to know when sharpening are Apex and Burr. I'll talk about both of these and what they mean. First, I want to draw what a dull knife looks like. Basically, a really round edge that is not very good for cutting. The goal of sharpening is to remove material off the blade so that the two sides of the blade are flat and meet at a sharp point like this. All of this material is what we're trying to remove. So that's what we're trying to do. And when you're sharpening, it's important that you sharpen to an apex. So the apex is this point right here. What you don't want to do is sharpen so that you just remove this material right here, but you still have this round section right there, and you remove this material right here. In this case, you didn't come to a full apex. You have to make sure that you remove all the material so that you get to an apex. But how do you know if you ever get to that point? Well, that's where the second word comes in, and that word is burr. So you'll keep sharpening, and eventually, once you apex, you actually form a very small piece of metal that comes off like this. And that piece of metal is called a burr. And it's actually really easy to feel when you've formed a burr. All you need to do is take your thumb and gently push against the knife like that, and you'll actually be able to feel a rough burr formed, and you'll feel your skin kind of catch on that, and that's when you know you've that's when you know you've formed a burr, and that's when you know that you have come to a complete apex. All right, so our stone has soaked for about 10 minutes now, and now it's time to pull it out and get started sharpening. So the first thing that we'll do is take a look at the stone and notice that there's two sides or two grits. There's the white side that's 6,000 fine grit and more coarse grit, 1,000 grit on the blue side. So we're gonna go ahead and start with the more coarse grit, which is the 1,000. We actually have this rubber piece that helps it fit into the holder a little bit better. All right, so now that we have the stone in place, let's go ahead and get started sharpening. There's a lot of different techniques and methods that you'll see online. A lot of people have really strong opinions on that, but I'll kind of show you what I do and what's worked for me. And definitely leave in the comments any suggestions or things that work well for you. So the first thing that I like to do is to drip a little bit more water on the whetstone just to make sure it's nice and wet. And then we'll go ahead and get started. So the easiest way to start is having the knife blade edge pointing towards you. And you can start with a simple motion, and usually you'll want to go from heel to tip or the other way around, either whatever works for you. But the first thing you want to do is kind of lay it flat, lay the knife flat on the whetstone, and then kind of bring it up until you feel, you can feel that your angle matches the angle of the knife blade. So if you start here and put your finger there, you can kind of start to feel that that feels like it's trying to be flush with the angle of the blade. So that's kind of the angle that you'll want to start with, and you'll want to try to keep that angle very consistent as you go through the motion. So again, you're just going to start like this, and you can do a nice easy stroke, and you want to go from, again, heel to tip, and make sure that you cover the whole distance of the blade. Now, another thing that I've seen a lot on the internet is people that will, again, they'll find the right angle, and then they'll do short little motions like this back and forth. I think this is really effective, especially if you have a dull knife and you have a lot of material to move. If your knife is pretty sharp and you don't need to remove a lot of material, you might be able to just do a quick couple strokes like this. I don't know, up to a dozen or a couple dozen. And that might be enough to remove all the material that you need. So let's say that we've done this 24 times on this side. Then you'll want to make sure that you do the same amount on the other side, because it's really important to do the same amounts on both sides. So when you go back, it can be a little awkward at first, but you'll kind of want to just do the opposite of what you did on the front side. Again, you want to try to maintain the same angle all the way through. So that's just an example of how you do that. So I'm going to go ahead and work on this blade. I'll probably put a time lapse in and show you the way I'm going to do it. So now what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to sharpen on this side. So basically pointing the edge of the blade towards me until I form a burr. And I'll know that I have formed a burr when I push down like this, and I'll be able to feel my skin catch, and I can feel that rough part of the blade, that piece of metal that's flipped over. And that's how long I know that I need to sharpen. I'm not sure how many strokes that's actually going to be, but as soon as I form that burr, I know that I've sharpened enough, and then I'll flip it over, do the same thing on this side until I feel the burr, and then at that point it'll be a matter of doing the same number on each side. So basically we're trying to get that burr to point pretty much straight out, so it's not flipped over to either side. And so that's what I'm going to do. Now that I've felt the burr on both sides, so it started on this side, I could feel over here, and then I flipped to this side, and now I can feel on this side. So once I feel the burr, have felt the burr on both sides, I'll go back to the side that I started on and probably do about 20 to 30 strokes, then do 20 to 30 strokes on this side, and then I gradually do less and less strokes on each side. The same number on each side, but each time I go back and do a smaller number. So I'll start with probably about 30, 25, 20, 15, 10, and then kind of go back and forth after that. So that's what you'll see next. So you probably noticed as I was going through, especially at the start, that I would feel the edge. And again, what I was doing is just checking for that burr. And as soon as that burr was formed, then I'd flip it over and sharpen on the other side, and then feel that burr on that side. One thing I want to point out is just like all this water just came off the stone while I was sharpening. You can see that it's got a lot of gray matter in that, and that's basically the steel that I've removed. So, I mean, depending on how dull your knife is, you'll have more or less material to remove, but in this case, I was starting with a pretty dull knife and ended up, removing quite a bit of material. You can see that it's all over the stone, it's all over in the water there, and again, if your knife isn't very sharp, you probably won't have to remove that much material, but where I knew I was starting with a really dull knife, I was pretty aggressive in trying to remove material and again try to form a burr and know that I had an apex there. And then so the finished product is a knife that's pretty dang sharp. Again, there's a lot of different ways to test how sharp your knife is. One way is just by gently kind of feeling the edge of the blade, and if it kind of feels like it's starting to grip into your thumb there, then you know that it's a pretty sharp knife. You want to make sure that it's sharp on all parts of the blade. So the test that we talked about earlier that is kind of disputed on the internet, whether it's a good test or not, is how well it cuts through paper. So you'll remember when I cut at the beginning that it didn't really cut, it more tore, it didn't really start to cut immediately. So let's see if we can just tell a difference by what we've done after sharpening it. Yeah, so definitely it just slides right through now. Much easier. And you see how it stopped right there? That might mean that we have like a little nick in that part of the blade, so it just kind of caught at that part, and so that might be a part that we want to touch up. But for the most part, it glides pretty easily through the paper. There's no catching it. It goes right through immediately. Another test that people will do is it sharp enough to shave? So we'll kind of just take some of my arm hairs here and see if we can get some of them to shave off, and sure enough, let's see if you can yeah, maybe you can see those are the hairs. So it does shave. I mean, it'd probably have to go over it multiple times to get all the hair, but definitely picking up some of the hair. So you got to be pretty happy about that. So now we got a knife that is, again, sharp enough to shave with, so that's usually as sharp as you need it. It's definitely sharp enough for the kitchen and where it's going to perform really well and be able to cut and slice through anything really easily that you're working with. So this is a good point, but you can always make it a little bit sharper. And the way we would do that is by going ahead and flipping over the stone. So we started with the 1000 grit. And now we can work on the finer side, which is going to be the 6000 grit. So I didn't do as much work on the 6000 grit side as I did on the 1000 grit, just because the 1000 grit is meant to remove more of the material. And by the time you get to the higher grit, you already have the bevel and the apex that you want. So it's more of just, whereas the lower grit will have on the microscopic level just kind of a more rough pattern on it. But when you go to a finer grit, you're keeping pretty much the same shape and the same bevel, the same flatness, but what you're doing is making it, whereas a little bit rougher using the 1000, the 6000 grit will just make that smoother. So that'll be sharper. And again, I've kind of went ahead and shaved all of the hair off of my hand there, so it's definitely sharp. I'm definitely happy with how this turned out, especially since, like I said, this is just about as cheap of a knife as you can get. It's just, like I said, used knife from the thrift store that I got for $1, and now it's sharp enough to shave with. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the video today, and I hope you learned something from it. I think the cool takeaway is that I got this knife for $1 at a thrift store, and I was able to make it pretty much razor sharp. I was able to shave my arm hairs with it, so that's definitely sharp enough to do anything that you'll need to do in the kitchen. The other thing I hope you took from it is review of the Absolute Peak Products Whetstone Knife Sharpener. It's a really great kit for people just starting out. I'm learning how to sharpen. It comes with an ebook that gives you step-by-step instructions, but it's also a high-quality kit. So if you're familiar with sharpening and you're just looking for another set to add to your collection, definitely worth checking out. Go ahead and leave your comments in the comments section and tell me your favorite tips and tricks about how you sharpen your knives. I'd love to hear from you, but until next time, we'll talk to you later.